My wife told me she was going to her boss's house after the party, with such a light, casual smile, as if it were just another ordinary night. But in that instant, in that tiny second between her words and my response, something inside me broke. And it was there, without shouting, without a scene, that I left her frozen with just one sentence. I said, "Then take your things, because you're not coming back to our house from there." The smile vanished. And in that dense silence, the kind of silence that screams inside, the truth was revealed without any confession being necessary. I left the party alone, walking with slow, heavy steps, but with my head held high. My heart was in pieces, yes. But my dignity? Intact. It was the coldest night of my life, not because of the wind, but because of the emptiness that accompanied me home. The place that used to be our home now seemed like the scene of a silent crime, where love was murdered by betrayal. There was no physical confrontation, no scandalous arguments, just the abrupt severing of a bond that had been betrayed. The memories came rushing back like knives, her laughter during movie nights, the impromptu Sunday breakfasts, the silly messages during work hours. All of that now seemed to have been performed by an actress, and I, a deluded spectator, watching a play that was never real. I started going over the last few months in my head, and little by little, the pieces fell into place. The flimsy excuses, the distant glances, the phone always face down. The messages answered late, the cancelled dinners, the new perfume that wasn't for me. And even without proof, my heart had known for a long time. I just didn't want to accept it. The following nights were cruel. The bed was too big, the house was deafeningly silent, and the memory of her perfume lingered in the sheets. Sleeping became a battle, and waking up meant remembering, every day, that the love I had given so wholeheartedly had been discarded on a whim, an illusion, or worse, out of boredom. And even so, despite all that, there was no hatred. There was pain, a pain that felt alive, breathing inside my chest, but never hatred. I loved her too much to hate her. And perhaps that's what destroyed me the most. She didn't return that night, nor the next day. When she finally appeared, it was to get clothes, her eyes downcast, and an expression that mixed pride and guilt. There was no apology. Only silence and shopping bags. The kind of silence that carries more truth than any explanation. I didn't ask, she didn't explain. The end wasn't with screams, it was with the absence of any words. And that kind of ending, that's the one that kills you inside. And even so, I let her go. Without promising revenge, without wishing her harm. I let time do its work. And it did. She believed that the choice she made was the path to something better. Perhaps love, perhaps emotion, perhaps security. But what she found was emptiness. It was rejection. What was intense became superficial. What seemed like freedom became loneliness. And when she tried to go back, when she wanted to rebuild what she herself had destroyed, she found a different man. A man who had learned to love himself after being broken by the one who promised to care for him. A man who understood that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. And I forgave. Not for her, but for myself. I forgave to take the weight off my shoulders, to breathe again, to sleep in peace. But forgiving is not forgetting, and much less reconnecting. What has been destroyed cannot be rebuilt with pretty words. She tried to explain herself. She sat in front of me, her eyes brimming with tears, her hands trembling, trying to string together sentences that would make sense, that would justify what cannot be justified. She said she felt alone, that she wanted to find herself again, that her boss was charismatic, that his attention made her feel alive. I just listened. Each word sounded like a slow gunshot, but I didn't react. Because there was nothing left to feel. I was a rebuilt man. She cried. She apologized. She said she loved me. And I, looking directly into her eyes, replied in the calmest voice I could muster, I cried too. But it passed. Her expression at that moment. I'll never forget it. It was as if she had finally understood. Understood that she had lost me. Understood that there was no going back. Understood that the love she had scorned now resided elsewhere. In another body. In another soul. Someone who didn't know how to value it lost it. And someone who arrived with sincerity and respect, won it over. This new woman, she didn't arrive in an overwhelming way, nor with romantic promises. She came calmly. With patience. With truth. She didn't try to heal my wounds, but she taught me to live with them. She didn't want to compete with a ghost from the past, she just wanted to be present. And it was in this silent presence, in this constant gaze, in this unpretentious affection, that I found a new home. A love without games, without secrets, without half-truths. A love that started small, but grew strong. Because it came after the pain. And everything that is born after pain has deeper roots. And her. She carried the weight of her choice. The echo of a decision that seemed right in the heat of vanity, but which proved cruel in the coldness of regret. She wasn't punished by me. She was punished by absence. By loss. By the constant reminder of what she destroyed. Because the true punishment for those who betray doesn't come from the other person. It comes from the emptiness left when you lose someone you truly loved. And that emptiness isn't filled with adventures, new passions, or excuses. It remains. It corrodes. It weighs heavily. And one day, it weighs so heavily that it becomes unbearable. Time passed. I moved on. She stayed. Trapped in a memory, in a failed attempt at reconstruction, in a regret that came too late. And when our eyes met years later, she tried to smile. But eyes don't lie. And hers were full of everything mine once carried, pain, longing, guilt. I smiled back. Not out of pride, but for peace. And in that brief, silent, and cruel second, she understood it was too late. Because when the betrayed find peace, the betrayer finds their true punishment. But what made her make such a rash decision? What happened behind the scenes of this story that led to everything collapsing? What were the ignored signs? The unseen attempts at reconciliation? What really motivated the betrayal? What truths were revealed too late? And most importantly, why, even though she regretted it, was she never able to get back together with the man she claimed to love? Now, it's time to find out. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize or justify betrayal. All the stories told are fictional, but they carry profound emotional truths, created to show how betrayal destroys love, corrodes homes, and scars lives forever. This channel is a reminder that choices have consequences, and that loyalty never goes out of style. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is a shocking, intense, and unforgettable story. Enjoy the story. They met on an ordinary September afternoon, one of those when the sky seems bluer than usual and the wind blows with a calmness that almost deceives time. It was in a discreet cafe, on an unassuming street, where Daniel's eyes met Emily's for the first time. She was holding a book, distracted by her own notes, and he, while ordering his coffee, accidentally dropped his wallet near her table. A simple, almost cliché gesture, but one that became the starting point for something that, at the time, seemed destined to last a lifetime. Neither of them knew it, but a story was being born there, made of silent laughter, long walks, whispered promises, and plans shared between sips of coffee and glances that spoke louder than words could express. Daniel was a man of serene personality, one of those who observe the world before speaking, who listen more than they impose. He possessed a calmness that extended even to the way he straightened his tie before leaving for work, a meticulous routine that only those who have suffered too much learn to cultivate. He had grown up in a home where his parents couldn't hold a conversation without turning everything into conflict, and perhaps that's why he had become a peacemaker, someone who valued harmony around him. He worked in financial consulting, but his true calling was understanding people. He knew how to listen, he knew how to read silences, and so, when he met Emily, he read in her something that even she herself didn't seem to know how to name, a beautiful weariness, a desperate desire to feel safe, loved, protected. Emily, for her part, was full of nuances. Intelligent, engaging, with a firm voice and a laugh that easily dominated the room. She had studied literature and divided her time between freelance writing projects and collaborations with cultural magazines. There was something enchanting about how she saw the world, as if everything had a poetic layer, a hidden metaphor, a story behind the surface. But behind that sparkle in her eyes, there were also doubts. A history of unresolved relationships, insecurities shaped over the years by men who made her doubt her own worth, and an almost silent need to be chosen every day. When she met Daniel, she felt for the first time that she could rest. That someone would finally see her whole, without fragments. In their early years, they lived a peaceful, steadfast love, based on respect and the slow building of a shared routine. There were no excesses, nor idealizations, but there was presence. Daniel always arrived with small flowers on their dating anniversaries, not out of obligation, but because he remembered her favorite flowers. Emily, in turn, wrote notes left haphazardly in his books, with short but meaningful messages, such as, "I admire you even in silence." These were small gestures that created a solid web of affection and care, and to outsiders, made the couple seem almost immune to the storms of the world. Friends said they were the kind of couple that gave hope, that proved that mature love still existed. They built a life together without rushing. First came the used furniture for their first apartment, which they assembled themselves amidst stumbles and laughter. Then, the dinners with friends, where she always took the lead in the conversation and he smiled, proudly observing the sparkle in her eyes. The short weekend trips, the visits to the cinema, the discussions about what color to paint the living room wall, all of this was the foundation of a relationship that seemed to have been built with emotional concrete. Emily said that Daniel was her home, and he deeply believed it. In every hug, in every coffee served in bed on Sundays, there was the certainty that they were in the right place, with the right person. And for a long time, this certainty protected them from the small cracks that life inevitably brings. With time came challenges. The failed attempt to buy a bigger house, the scare with Daniel's father's health, the delays in Emily's freelance payments, which wounded her pride. But through all these moments, they remained side by side, as if they had learned not to let go of each other's hands when the ground began to shake. He said that everything could be resolved, as long as it was with her. And she said that she trusted him, even when she couldn't trust anything else. There was complicity. There was history. There was love. Or at least, there was the solid appearance of love, the kind of construction that no one imagines could crumble. But love also gets tiring. Or maybe you wear yourself out, even when no one is paying attention. And it was gradually, in silences longer than usual, in messages that took longer to be answered, in kisses that became rushed before work, that routine began to silence the enchantment. Emily began to dedicate herself more to the events of the publishing house she wrote for, attending cocktail parties and book launches alone, saying they were just brief commitments. Daniel, on the other hand, immersed himself more in work, trying to keep up with the accumulating bills, the expectations that didn't cease, the fears that returned uninvited. And although they still slept side by side, something between them no longer touched with the same naturalness. The affection still existed, but it seemed hidden under layers of exhaustion. Friends began to notice the change. The declined invitations, the forced smiles and photos, her absence from the dinners she used to insist on organizing. But no one asked directly. After all, couples change, evolve, transform. And, to the world, they still seemed fine. But inside the house, the air was colder. And it was this coldness that began to distance their bodies, their words, their gazes. Daniel tried to talk, but Emily avoided him. She said everything was fine, that it was just a phase. He believed her, because he wanted to believe her. Because it was easier to cling to hope than to face the possibility that something was, in fact, falling apart. She started coming home later from events. She claimed meetings, casual encounters, traffic. Daniel prepared dinners that would sit cold on the table. He read her books in an attempt to reconnect with her world, while she seemed to inhabit another one. A world where he was no longer invited as often. Still, he persisted. Because whoever truly loves, first tries. Tries 1,000 times before accepting that they are losing. But each attempt came with a new disappointment. Each effort was met with indifference. Emily became increasingly distant, as if she were physically present but emotionally absent. And Daniel. Daniel didn't know if it was just exhaustion or the beginning of the end. There was a dinner planned to celebrate their wedding anniversary. He had carefully organized everything, her favorite restaurant, the same song they danced to on their first trip, the same cologne she wore on their first date. He arrived early, waited patiently, rereading old messages as time passed. And she arrived, late, with a rehearsed excuse, a tired smile, and eyes that no longer sought him in the same way. They dined in silence, between a lame joke and a memory revived out of obligation. On the way back, in the car, he held her hand. She didn't return the squeeze. And in that absence of response, something inside him broke a little more. In the following days, everything seemed to continue as before. But inside, Daniel was no longer the same. He began to observe more. Noticing the details. The furtive glances at her cell phone. The way she dressed differently when going out alone. The smiles he hadn't seen in weeks, but which seemed to appear in photos taken by others. Still, he remained silent. Because silence, sometimes, is the last shield of those who are afraid to discover they are right. And the pain of confirmation, however long it drags on, always arrives. He knew, but he didn't want to know. On the night of the publisher's party, Emily dressed up like she hadn't in a long time. She wore a new dress, impeccable makeup, a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen directed at him in ages. Daniel complimented her, but the compliment hung in the air, unanswered. When she said that after the party she was going to her boss's house to discuss a new project, he just looked at her. A long, tired look, full of everything that had never been said. And then, he said the phrase that changed everything. But that is what's to come. That night, the clock seemed to mark time differently. Each second sounded louder, slower, as if the universe conspired to stretch the pain to its limit. Emily had left hours before, promising to return late, and Daniel was there, alone, sitting on the living room sofa, the house immersed in a heavy silence. The light from the lamp created shadows that moved on the walls, and the sound of the clock echoed like a persistent memory. He no longer expected anything, no explanations, but there was still a small, stubborn part of him that wanted to believe it was all just a misunderstanding. However, when the hours turned into dawn and the sound of the key finally turned in the lock, that part also died. She entered without realizing he was awake. His face showed a mixture of tiredness and something else, something Daniel knew well, because that gleam had once been his. He stood slowly, unhurriedly, like someone who knows exactly the weight of the words he's about to say. Emily was startled to see him there, sitting in the dim light, his eyes fixed on her. The silence between them was almost solid, cutting. She tried to smile, to say something about work, but he interrupted before she could invent another story. Then take your things, because you're not coming back to our house from there. The sentence came out firm, cold, without tremor. And, in that instant, her smile simply vanished. Her eyes filled with tears before she even understood why. There was no scream, no plea. Only the sound of her own heart crashing down in her chest. She tried to argue, to say that everything was being misinterpreted, that he was tired, that stress might be clouding things. But he didn't answer. He just walked to the window and stared out, as if the world outside was easier to face than the truth before him. Emily took a few steps, hesitated, and finally let the tears fall. "Please, don't do this to me," she murmured, her voice trembling, her body bent over by the guilt that was beginning to grow. Daniel turned slowly, and his eyes no longer held fury, only a weary emptiness, the kind of look of someone who had loved until they couldn't anymore. "To you. Emily, you're the one who did this to us." The word us hurt more than any accusation. Because there, she realized, there was no longer an us. In the following days, everything that was routine fell apart. The silverware in the dish rack, her books stacked on the bedside table, the photos in their frames. She tried to resist the idea that she was being expelled from her own life, but Daniel didn't back down. He had made his decision, not out of pride, but for survival. He knew that forgiving at that moment would mean sinking along with her. And yet, the love still pulsed like an open, throbbing wound. Time passed slowly. She left, took some clothes, said she needed space. He let her go. Because sometimes, the greatest love someone can give is allowing the other to go, even knowing that their absence will be torture. The silence that followed was the true grief. And no one teaches you how to grieve for someone who is still alive. Without her, Daniel found himself in ruins. But ruins are also the starting point for reconstruction. He went back to running in the mornings, to working with more focus, to rediscovering the pleasure of being alone. And it was in that time, in that space, that he began to rediscover his own voice. He met someone, a serene woman with a sweet gaze, who demanded nothing more than presence. Little by little, he allowed his heart to open, but this time with care. She didn't heal him, but she helped him understand that true love doesn't need to hurt to be intense. That peace can also be passion, that respect is also desire. And he allowed himself to start over, without the weight of the past. Emily, on the other hand, followed the opposite path. At first, she believed she had made the right choice. She thought that her newfound freedom would be synonymous with fulfillment. But she soon realized that freedom without love is just disguised loneliness. The conversations that once seemed interesting turned into awkward silences. Gestures of attention transformed into indifference. And when she found herself alone, without the initial sparkle, she began to understand the magnitude of the loss. Memories of Daniel returned in detail, the way he listened, the notes left around the house, the patience he had even when she didn't deserve it. And it was this accumulation of memories that began to corrode her from the inside. Regret is a type of pain that doesn't scream, it whispers slowly, until it becomes deafening. Months passed, and her world seemed to close in on itself. Friends drifted away, routine lost its meaning, and the nights became too long. One day, she mustered the courage to seek him out. She sent a simple message, asking to talk. He took a while to reply, but he did. He agreed to meet her at a discreet cafe, the same kind of place where it had all begun. When he arrived, she was already there, nervous, fidgeting with her empty cup. Seeing him enter, her heart raced in a way it hadn't in a long time. Daniel seemed different. His gaze lighter, his smile serene, his posture tranquil, like someone no longer carrying a burden. She tried to speak, but the words became jumbled. He sat down, waiting in silence. She had started it. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, taking a deep breath. "I just want you to know that I'm sorry. That I blame myself every day. That I would trade everything to have a chance to do things differently." Daniel listened in silence, without interrupting. When she finished, he remained quiet for a few seconds, watching the steam of the coffee rising slowly. Then, he spoke with the calm that only someone who has made peace with themselves can have. "You know what's curious? I also spent months trying to understand what I did wrong. I thought the problem was me, that I had ceased to be enough. And then one day, I realized it wasn't about that. It was about what you were looking for outside, because you could no longer see what was inside. And I needed to lose you to understand that the love I gave also deserved to come back to me." She cried, lowered her eyes, tried to hold back the tears, but he continued. "I don't hate you, Emily. I forgive you. But I don't love you anymore." The words landed between them like a silent blow. She stood motionless, her face wet with tears, her trembling lips trying to form a response that wouldn't come. "But I still love you," she managed to say between sobs. Daniel took a deep breath, looked into her eyes, and replied with a tenderness that hurt more than any coldness. "I cried too, Emily. But it's over." There was a long, endless silence. The kind of silence that says everything. She understood then that there was no going back, that his forgiveness wasn't an invitation, it was goodbye. The love she had destroyed no longer existed, and the man before her, despite having the same face, was different. A man who had learned that peace is worth more than any turbulent passion. As they stood up to leave, she tried to smile, but couldn't. He extended his hand politely, and she held it for a moment, like someone trying to cling to a past slipping through their fingers. He simply said, "Take care of yourself." And he left. She stood there, watching him cross the street, the wind ruffling his hair, a lump forming in her throat. For the first time, she understood the true weight of a choice. She had traded a secure, true love for a fleeting illusion. And now, nothing remained. Not him, not the sparkle, not the home. Only the echo of what could have been. Months later, she saw him again, by chance. She was in a park, reading a book, when the sound of laughter caught her attention. She looked up and saw him, Daniel, walking hand in hand with another woman. A woman with a gentle expression, a sweet gaze, serenity personified. They laughed as if sharing an intimacy built with patience. Emily watched from afar, her chest tight, her breath slowly fading. When he noticed her, there was a brief moment when their eyes met. She waited for some sign, a hesitation, any trace of the man who once loved her. But what she saw was a gentle, calm smile, without resentment. A smile of someone who no longer carries pain. He slightly inclined his head in greeting and continued walking, his firm hand intertwined with that of his new companion. And at that exact moment, she understood that the true punishment was not contempt, nor oblivion. It was his peace. Because when the betrayed finds peace, the betrayer finds his hell. Time passed with the slowness of someone who insists on leaving their mark. The days weren't easy, nor were the weeks light, but Daniel learned to breathe again. And when he least expected it, the pain that seemed unbearable transformed into distant longing, and then into silent acceptance. The house that once seemed empty gradually gained new meaning. The memories settled into corners that no longer hurt, only reminded them. He painted the walls, changed the furniture, renovated the garden. It wasn't just the house that was transforming, it was him. Each small new detail carried the strength of someone who chose not to carry the weight of resentment, but rather the lessons it left behind. And in that slow process of reconstruction, the unexpected happened. He smiled again with joy, he listened to music without crying, he looked in the mirror and recognized himself. The woman who crossed his path during this new phase didn't arrive with promises, nor in a hurry. She appeared like a gentle breeze, a conversation that lasted longer than planned, a look that demanded nothing more than truth. She was different from everything he had ever experienced. There was no urgency of uncontrolled passion, but rather the lightness of the encounter between two mature hearts, marked, but still willing. She didn't want to take anyone's place, she didn't want to heal wounds that weren't hers, she simply walked beside him, at the right time, at the right pace. And it was in this simplicity that he understood, the peace he had always sought was not in erasing the past, but in writing a future with someone who understands the value of a whole love. Emily, on the other hand, plunged into an abyss of her own making. At first, she tried to convince herself that everything was temporary, that time was all it would take to find herself again. But time, instead of healing her, laid bare the emptiness she herself had built by giving up something so pure for a momentary fantasy. People drifted away. Friendships that seemed solid proved superficial. The companions who once gave her status vanished when she no longer served a purpose. What remained was the solitude of a cold apartment, where the echo of memories was more present than any real voice. She stared at her phone, waiting for messages that never came. She scrolled through social media, trying to feel part of a life that no longer existed. Everything that once seemed certain dissolved before her like fog. In a desperate attempt to find meaning again, she sought new relationships, but nothing seemed to fill the void. They were shallow conversations, fleeting interests, promises that lasted no more than a few nights. She searched in other eyes for the reflection of a love she had once had, but let slip away. She tried to reconnect with her own essence, immersed herself in books, traveled alone, sought help, but the pain of regret is like a scar. No matter how much time softens it, it will always be there to remind her of the mistake made. And the worst punishment wasn't losing Daniel, it was realizing that he had found himself again and built a happy life without her. Nothing hurts more than seeing someone you loved truly happy, with someone else. One afternoon, while wandering aimlessly through a park they used to frequent together, Emily saw from afar the scene that had haunted her thoughts for years: Daniel sitting on a bench, with his new wife beside him, laughing at something simple, his eyes closed and his head tilted back, like someone who felt completely at home. On the other side, a boy ran between them, and when he approached, jumped into his lap with such spontaneous joy that it elicited loud laughter. Emily stopped right there, her heart racing, her eyes welling up. It was the kind of scene she had always dreamed of experiencing, but had missed out on because of choices that now seemed so small, so immature, so inconsequential. She watched for minutes, wishing she hadn't been seen. But the instant he noticed her, there was no hesitation. Daniel simply looked. There was no surprise, no pain, no hurt. Just a brief nod, like someone recognizing someone from the past. His new partner noticed the look and gently touched his arm, asking if everything was all right. He responded with a calm smile, and then went back to playing with his son. Emily then understood, with a churning stomach and a tight chest, she was no longer part of that story. From then on, life didn't improve for her. On the contrary, the awareness of what she had lost became a ghost that haunted her everywhere. And it wasn't just Daniel she lost. She lost herself. She lost the admiring gaze of someone who loved her in the simplest and truest way. She lost respect, lightness, and sparkle. And when she tried to tell her life story to someone new, she always stumbled upon the part that hurt the most, explaining how she destroyed her own home. It wasn't others who judged her. It was herself. Because no one is more cruel to us than our own guilt. Daniel, on the other hand, went his own way. With balance, with love, with peace. The new woman by his side became his wife, and together they built a family based on respect and truth. He never hid his story, never erased what he experienced with Emily, but he also never allowed the past to guide his present. It was through pain that he learned to value small gestures, and it was by surviving betrayal that he discovered his own worth. Today, he lives a serene life. With sincere conversations at the breakfast table, with peaceful afternoons in the garden, with the joy of a son who grew up surrounded by genuine affection. And even though painful memories still exist, they no longer have the power to hurt. They serve only as a reminder of how far he has come. Emily is alone. Some acquaintances still try to get close, others have simply forgotten her. She continues with her work, continues to frequent the same places, but something in her is lost. She never loved the same way again, and perhaps never will. Because regret is a prison one only enters when one realizes, too late, the value of what one had. And Daniel? He forgave her. But he didn't come back. And that was the biggest shock of all. She thought forgiveness was an invitation. But it was a goodbye. A period written with maturity, with respect, but still, a period. If you've made it this far, this story has definitely stirred something within you. And now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Did this resonate with you in any way? Did it make you reflect on choices, on trust, on the value of those who walk beside us? Leave your opinion in the comments, it's very important for us to know what you think. And of course, subscribe to the channel to accompany other stories like this one, made to move you and make you reflect on what really matters in life. The great truth is that betrayal is never worth it. She doesn't just destroy the other person, she destroys the one who betrays her as well. She steals respect, erases plans, breaks admiration, and in the end, leaves us alone with the choices we made. This story is fictional, but the pain and feelings it portrays are all too real. They are experienced every day by people who regret it too late. Our channel does not support, justify, or romanticize any type of infidelity. Here, the truth is clear: love is built on loyalty, respect, and presence. And those who impulsively abandon this, may never have the chance to return.